Has Trump got it in for India? He's called India-US relations a one-sided disaster. He says he doesn't care if India's dead economy sinks. And now he says he could even consider a second, perhaps even a third phase of additional tariffs. Is this beginning to feel vindictive?
Yes, quite clearly it's vindictive. Quite clearly, as you said, he seems to have it in for India. We can't avoid that conclusion. And it's not only him, but some of his very key aides are using language that we have not heard from the US side in a long time. This is certainly a more challenging, time for Indian diplomacy. There is no doubt that we are perhaps in a more vulnerable situation than we have been for quite some time.
A naked man has little to no influence on society. In clothes like this, you step out and you know that you're going to turn heads. You know that you're going to create an impression of a person who cares deeply about the way they look and has a finer eye for detail. And, that seems to be the Bombay Shirt Company way. What I really love about these clothes, and I really mean this, is this looks like a man has walked into the room. I like that. It's nice.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. How badly damaged is the India-US relationship, and what is the likelihood that it could further deteriorate? What impact could improving relations between Washington and Beijing and Washington and Islamabad have on India's relationship with America? And if India doesn't stop buying Russian oil, could we see a second or perhaps even a third phase of additional tariffs on India? And does all of this suggest that this is a bad time for Indian diplomacy? Those are the key issues I shall raise today with India's former Foreign Secretary and a former chairman of the National Security Advisory Board, Shyam Saran. Shyam Saran, let me start with a simple question. Analysts say India-US relations are at their lowest ebb since the 1990s. As a former foreign secretary, how badly damaged is the relationship between the United States and India?
I think it would be fair to say that they are at a very low point compared to, the ascendant phase which began, in the late 90s and early 2000s. We have not faced this kind of a challenge in the recent past. There have been issues between India and the US during the Cold War years. But, since our relations started improving, you remember that as Foreign Secretary, I was also involved in the negotiation of the nuclear deal, for example. And since then, actually, India-US relations have been on an upward curve, which many of us had perhaps not expected that it would go so far. So compared to that trajectory, there is no doubt that what Mr. Trump has done has, in fact, the potential of reversing some of those gains that we have made. Both countries have made.
Let me ask you, has Trump got it in for India? He's called India-US relations a one-sided disaster. He says he doesn't care if India's dead economy sinks. And now he says he could even consider a second, perhaps even a third phase of additional tariffs. Is this beginning to feel vindictive?
Yes, quite clearly it's vindictive. Quite clearly, as you said, he seems to have it in for India. We can't avoid that conclusion. And it's not only him, but some of his, very key aides are using language that we have not heard from the US side in a long time.
So let's then, against that background, ask the question, are India-US relations likely to stay at this low ebb, or could they begin to deteriorate? What's your answer?
Yes, they could certainly deteriorate if Mr. Trump continues on the path that he has chosen. Uh, the only caution I would give at this point is that even though we have this very negative kind of behavior on the part of Trump as far as India is concerned, I take some, consolation from the fact, if that is the right word to use, that some of the functional relationships between India and the US, say, for example, the defense partnership. You may have seen reports that Indian army personnel joined a training exercise just recently in Alaska. This is a good sign. We have had a meeting, although it was a online meeting between the two sides at the official level, and at that meeting, there were friendly noises made and commitment to further taking the relationship forward. So those have not yet been affected, but it is just possible that even these very strong linkages that we have with the US could be impacted if this continues.
Let's then look at some of the developments that could seriously impact Delhi's relationship with Washington. First, Trump continues to talk about his very good relationship with China and his friendship with Xi Jinping. He's keen to do a deal with Beijing, and he's even talked about visiting China by the end of this year. What impact will a significant improvement in US-China relations have on the US-India relationship?
Most definitely it will have an impact. No doubt about that. And it does seem from the language that we have from President Trump, when asked about US relations with China, he says the United States has very good relations with China. He adds that he has a very good personal relationship with President Xi Jinping, and that he would be maybe visiting China in the none too distant future. So what appears to me is that, the Indo-Pacific strategy, which has been in a sense a bedrock of the India-US strategic partnership, that seems to be under some kind of a review, thanks to President Bush. There is no doubt that you see a different treatment of China than in the past. For example, you have seen when the additional tariffs have been put on India for buying Russian oil. He has certainly not done that with regard to China. He backed off very quickly when there was a tariff war going on between the two countries. Okay, it was because China had some leverage over the United States, but it does appear that the China policy in the US is undergoing some kind of a review. Now, whether or not this will lead to really the kind of big bargain or big deal that he has been talking about, that, once we meet, we will be able to make a big deal with China. What that big deal is, would China in fact accept that big deal? That is a bit of a question mark. But I would also add here, Karan, that there is a certain history to this search for some kind of a overall understanding with China. You remember 2009 when Obama took over as president. That was also a time where there seemed to be some kind of a G2 emerging, with the US talking about how the relationship should be looking at China as a stakeholder in the international order, that the two countries should be exchanging strategic reassurances so that they are able to, safeguard their core interests. I mean, this kind of language really suggested that US was looking for some kind of a overall understanding with China, and India did react strongly to that, because there was also a reference to how China and the US will consult each other with respect to the situation in South Asia. So there is a certain history to this. When it did not work in those years, we had the US pivot to Asia. And that was a precursor to the revival of the Quad and the enunciation of the Indo-Pacific strategy. Maybe we should keep a watch. Maybe that is undergoing a change.
Let me quote from the article you wrote for the Hindustan Times on the 2nd. You said, and I'm quoting, India is most comfortable when its relations with the US and China are better than their relationship with each other. Today, it seems, the vibes between Washington and Beijing are certainly better than those between Washington and Delhi. So, are your concerns becoming real?
So I would not jump the gun and say we already see an improvement of relations between China and the US already emerging. That seems to be the intent, but it has not yet happened. So maybe one should reserve judgment on that particular issue. But that potential is certainly there. We see other signs, Karan. We don't know, for example, whether Trump will actually make the trip to India later this year for the Quad summit, for which India is host. You see a review taking place with regard to AUKUS, the Australia, US, UK nuclear submarine deal, where now it seems that the US, which was supposed to supply a nuclear submarine to Australia before these are manufactured in a serial basis in the later years, that is apparently not happening. Look at the attitude towards Taiwan. There are voices from Washington that no fundamental U.S. interests are involved with regard to Taiwan. So this is something which seems to suggest that the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy is likely to change in order to reach out to China. Of course, China would be very happy, if AUKUS is given up. China would be very happy if the Quad, does not survive on their second incarnation, and would definitely be very, very happy if, US makes it clear that we don't really have a commitment to the defense of Taiwan. So these are still, I would say, straws in the wind, but they are strong, indications. And we should be monitoring them very carefully. Now, so if that happens, some kind of a overall, understanding between China and the US, obviously this will shrink our room for maneuver.
Let me go one step further. Do you accept the interpretation put out by George Friedman, the former chairman of Stratfor, that the 50% tariffs imposed on India are not just a message to Russia, but also a message to China, with whom clearly Trump does want to do a deal? Friedman claims the message to China is we are not siding with India against you. How do you view that interpretation?
No, I won't go that far. For the simple reason that we haven't reached that point yet, and I'm not very sure that we will reach that point. I think what he has done with respect to India with the additional 25% tariff partly is a reflection of the peak that he has, personal peak that he has, that maybe India did not give him the kind of credit that the Pakistani army chief did. We know that these personal factors matter a great deal to Trump. I mean, you have seen how important it is for him to get a Nobel Prize, even though that seems very unlikely. So that element is very much there. But we also should take into account the fact that, this is not about buying oil from Russia. This is not about, telling China that we will not side with India with respect to China. Because if we say that, that brings into question not only the relationship with India, but what about the alliance with Japan? What about the alliance that the US has with South Korea? What about the alliance that the US has with Australia? I mean, the implications of what Friedman says is far more for the alliances that the US has in the region than it does for India. I mean, India is not locked in an alliance. Thank God we are not locked into an alliance. So we have some flexibility. But what will these allies of the United States do? So I do not think that you know. Trump is trying to somehow signal to China that we are not using India against you. If that is the case, it would not only be that we are not using India against you, but we are not, going to use the alliance against you, because that alliance is really focused on China.
Let's then at this point slightly flip the discussion. Against this background, how much improvement can there be in India's relationship with China? After all, China's rock solid relations with Pakistan are unlikely to change. Our border problems remain unresolved. China wants to dominate Asia, which India clearly does not want. And when it comes to trade, China has considerable leverage in terms of rare earths, fertilizers, and tunnel boring equipment. So, despite the smiles and handshake at Tianjin, is there significant room for a major improvement in India China relations?
There may be some tactical moves. And I think it should be also, perhaps we should note that the improvement in relations with China predates, the Trump era. So what you saw in SCO, it was not that this visit was taking place only because of Trump. No, because it was already on the Prime Minister's schedule, but that it took on a different different significance because of what Mr. Trump did. I think whether it is Xi Jinping or whether it's Putin, I think they wanted to take advantage of the fact that there is this growing rift between India and the US, and what is the way to enlarge it. Now, India has been trying to, also do its own signaling that, we do have a room for maneuver. We are a major power, and, other major powers are interested in the relationship with India. So there is a lot of flag waving going on, which we should treat as flag waving, because there are obviously limits to how much India-China relations can improve. They can improve, don't forget that for nearly 40 years, we had a reasonably stable relationship between India and China. There were areas where we had to confront China because our interests were being threatened. But there were also issues, particularly with respect to certain global issues like climate change, cybersecurity, the safety of space-based assets, where we had a certain common interest. Because we wanted to make certain that whatever global regime emerges from these negotiations, the interests of India and China would be better served if the two countries work together. So there was that kind of a little bit of a balance between the two. Now, because China now benchmarks itself with the United States, the room for that kind of a global cooperation has diminished, but it's not disappeared entirely. There are still areas where the two countries can work together, and there is a certain economic logic to the relationship between the two countries, because there is quite a great deal that India can perhaps gain from a different economic and commercial relationship. And don't forget that for China, The only large growing market is only India. So there is a certain commonality of interest which may allow you to further improve and expand the relationship. But I think there are clear limits, and those clear limits were very, very apparent in the kind of operational support given to Pakistan during Operation Sindoor. I think that tells its own story, and that, in a sense, really emphasizes that the India-China relationship, in essence, is an adversarial relationship. So your challenge is how to manage an essentially adversarial relationship.
Let me then at this point bring up something that you've touched on earlier in this interview. How do you see the future of Quad? The New York Times has actually published that Trump has no plans to visit India for the Quad summit, but the White House hasn't as yet officially confirmed that. But might Trump go one step further and actually sacrifice Quad for a big deal with China? Not just diminish the importance of Quad and push it to the margins, but perhaps sacrifice it and indicate to China, this is over, let's secure a relationship between ourselves instead.
So, Karan, I was witness to the first abandonment of Quad, which was initiated by the United States of America in 2007. And they really diluted the whole logic of the Quad by arguing with us that we need the Chinese and the Russians, because the Russians have also been opposed to this Quad. That at that time we needed consensus resolutions on the Iran nuclear issue, on the Korean nuclear issue. The Chinese and the Russians don't like this Quad kind of grouping that they mistakenly think may have a military dimension, and therefore, we want to play it down for the time being. So we have had that situation before, where the United States of America has used this more as a tactical instrument rather than as a strategic grouping. Now, we thought this may have changed because of the adoption of the Indo-Pacific strategy by the United States of America, in which not only Quad, but various other relationships that I mentioned, the bringing together of South Korea and Japan together in a more kind of a coordinated alliance, or the AUKUS, as we spoke about. So these were building blocks of that Indo-Pacific strategy. So the abandonment of Quad this time around has greater significance than it did in 2007. So if the Quad, if the US decides that it no longer wishes to really be part and parcel of the Quad, that would certainly indicate, as we were discussing before, that perhaps there is some kind of a fairly significant change that is being contemplated in terms of how the United States of America will now approach China. We should be, mindful of that.
Let me then ask you up front, do you see the possibility of some sort of G2 emerging between America and China? And if it were to be the case, how much of a concern would that be for Delhi?
Well, it would be a matter of concern because, we saw the last time around G2, China essentially pocketed what was given by the US, and then did not change its basic posture towards the United States. I have very little doubt that the Chinese would be very happy again to pocket what is on offer in this G2, and still continue to, try to, in a sense, dethrone the United States as the leader of the global order. I think if you look at the sentiment in China today, it is that we just have to sit back and let the United States actually, be deconstructed in some way by Trump, and that will allow us to perhaps our search for some kind of a hegemonic status would be possible. They call Trump in China in social media Jianguo, which means, building the nation. That is, Trump is actually become an instrument for building the Chinese nation. So not only will China gain by such offer of G2, but I would also say that any expectation on the part of the United States of America that some kind of a diarchy can emerge out of this, some kind of a condominium can emerge out of this, I think from the Chinese point of view, that would not be something which would prevent them from continuing on the path that they are. They believe it is their manifest destiny to get great power status. He said, if you look at Xi Jinping's statement during the military parade, China is unstoppable. That is the statement he made.
How disconcerting and how troublesome and worrying would this be for India? I imagine this is a major concern.
It would be a major concern, but I would say this. If you look at the outcome of Prime Minister's visit to Japan, I think it is worth looking at that closely, because you see already the two countries looking at what kind of situation they may face as a result of some of the emerging trends. And that means we need to come much closer together than we have been before. So the scope and the density of relationships which are being established between India and Japan, that is a pointer that countries are already looking at that possibility and then trying to adjust to it. I have very little doubt that we may even double down, for example, on our relationship with Australia. Because for India, for Japan, for Australia, what happens in this particular Indo-Pacific strategic space is vital. So if the United States of America says it's no longer interested in playing the lead role in this region, that means the other remaining countries here who are concerned about Chinese expansion will probably at least make an effort to come together.
But wouldn't a trilateral, if it were to emerge, be a lot weaker and less substantive than the quadrilateral that it replaces?
No doubt. No doubt. But, you have to work with what you have. So if there is that, eventuality, and I'm not saying that that is certainly going to happen. We are dealing with, at this point of time, some emerging trends. We don't know where this is going. What is the destination? There are very strong voices in the United States who are warning against this kind of possible policy approach. You may have seen I think there was an article by Sullivan and Kurt Campbell in the Foreign Affairs recently, which in fact not only warned against this, but also said that how the India-US relationship is absolutely critical to the United States, being able to maintain its preeminence in the region. But if Trump does not want that preeminence, then it's a whole new ball game.
Against that, let's come to the other second development that could also seriously impact Indo-US relations. I'm referring to Trump's attitude to Pakistan. In his first presidency, he accused Pakistan of lies and deceit. But now he considers it a phenomenal partner against counterterrorism and wants to help Pakistan prospect for oil. In your opinion, what impact will this rapprochement between Washington and Islamabad have on India-US relations?
So I think this turn of, relationship between Pakistan and US should not be seen as some kind of a fundamental strategic shift. But I think it was very much related again to Trump's ego, that you have this, army chief from Pakistan who has very cleverly understood that flattery works with Trump, has not only praised him for preventing escalation in the India-Pakistan conflict, but has also, also nominated him for the Nobel Prize, which is music to his ears, which has been denied to him by India. So that personal factor is a very important factor. Now, there is also the personal business, argument. So the whole crypto deal between the US and Pakistan. Um, Prospecting for oil, I'm somewhat skeptical. I think most Pakistanis are also skeptical about that prospect. But at this point of time, they are really basking in this turn of events and India being put in an uncomfortable situation. Of course, Pakistan would be happy with that situation. But the thing which worries me is that, here you have an army chief in Pakistan who is perhaps willing to take more risks in the relationship with India than perhaps other, Pakistani leaders have been. And if I look at the statements that he has made, particularly in Florida, when he was visiting, those are very intemperate statements. And he may think that, if you have an objective of internationalizing the Kashmir issue, if you have the prospect of raising Pakistan to a level of, again, very close hyphenation with India, that prospect may excite him, and therefore may believe that perhaps this is the right time to make some, provocation against India, provoke some kind of a conflict with India, so that it brings in not only the United States of America, but, internationalizes it, because we have to understand, we may want the world to focus attention on counterterrorism. We may want the world to look at Pakistan's complicity in cross-border terrorism. People, our friends, are concerned about that too, share our concern, but they are also concerned about these two countries being nuclear weapon states, and the prospect, perhaps, of this escalating, any conflict escalating to the nuclear level. No matter how much we try to get away from that perception is there because you are nuclear weapon states. Now, for the Pakistanis, this is a very convenient way of actually, suggesting to the world that there has to be an active involvement in order to prevent this escalation. So there are limits to our being able to engage in diplomacy which focuses attention on the cross-border terrorism part and not so much on the nuclear part.
Absolutely. I mean, Operation Sindoor happened. The stress that India wanted to put on counter-terrorism was actually almost obliterated by the Western world's insistence upon viewing this in terms of nuclear
Karan, I would not say obliterated. I think I have enough experience, dealing with our friends in many countries who are deeply concerned about cross-border terrorism, because several of them have suffered from that terrorism themselves. But when it comes to looking at the overall picture, and there is a nuclear dimension which is put there, while they will express sympathy for you on the terrorism issue, that does not preclude and that does not obviate the very, I would think, somewhat natural concern they have that, this could escalate to the nuclear level. And we have to be mindful of that dimension.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Finally, let's come to Russia. Vice President Vance has said that 25% secondary tariffs have been imposed on India as aggressive economic leverage on Russia to stop the Ukraine war. But clearly, so far, it's not working. If anything, Putin is continuing with the war, and it seems as if he'll carry on with it till he can get the outcome that he prefers. Do you fear that a desperate, or at least a frustrated Trump might actually move to impose second and third phase tariffs on India? Since he's very reluctant to do anything to Russia, might he take out his wrath on India instead?
Yeah, so I have right in the beginning, if you recall, the very first article I wrote in the Indian Express about these tariffs and how we should react to these tariffs. I said this is not about India buying oil from Russia. I think we would be missing the whole impact of this by just focusing attention on this aspect. Trump is using a commercial instrument in order to gain geopolitical ends. So if it makes geopolitical sense to him to raise the tariffs even further against India, he will. I don't have any doubt about that. But I think, currently perhaps there is still a certain sense of perhaps ambiguity, a certain ambiguity about where he wants to go with this. Because to really sort of signal that this is all out now to do India in, what can India's response be except to try and deal with that situation by building up its network of relationships with others, including Russia.
Let me ask you two more questions about the tariff situation. The truth is that the saving by buying Russian oil, which is said to be somewhere between $1.50 and $2.50 per barrel, is considerably less than the cost of losing possibly 48 billion worth of exports to America. So in economic terms, there's a good case for stopping buying Russian oil. But the question is, do the strategic and political reasons for continuing to buy Russian oil outweigh the economic ones?
So I think two or three elements involved here. First of all, if it is not about buying Russian oil, so even if you perhaps reduce your purchase of Russian oil, will that necessarily mean that automatically the tariffs will go away? Not necessarily. He might find another excuse to say, no, I'm not satisfied with this. India has to do this or do that if it wants these tariffs to be reduced. You are talking about, for example, the likely threat of second phase or third phase tariffs. Even if you don't buy oil from Russia, he may still decide for other reasons to go ahead with that. So I think we should be a little careful in judging this in those kind of terms, what is the gain, what is the loss. I think it is much more than that. To me, it is no longer a trade issue. It is a larger issue. And unless you understand that this is a larger issue, you may be engaged in making concessions, not only with respect to buying oil from Russia, but also on the the entry of or the access the US has to the Indian market, which he wants much more than what we are in a position to offer. Don't forget, even if there are people who say, why don't you make some concessions like the Europeans have done or the Japanese have done? This is only a question of 4 years, when a new political dispensation comes in, which is much more, realistic about US role, etc. This will go away. Whatever concessions you make, whether it is with this government or another government, those will stay. because that becomes the floor from which you then start the next round of negotiations. So no reversal will be done in terms of what concessions you make. So you have to be very careful in that respect. Secondly, as I said, the question of buying oil from Russia, there is a certain, and you are aware, there is a certain history to that as well. But here is a country which believes in business, believes in profit making, believes that doing a deal is a good thing if it if it works for you. Why are you denying that India is seeking a deal for itself which enhances its own profits? Why? It is not. I mean, to say India is profiteering, but it is okay if the US is profiteering and he is creating conditions where at least some favored companies make even more profit. Why do you apply a different standard here? So, but the more larger point I would make, which I did right in the beginning, that here you are dealing with a bully, and if you give in to the bully in the first instance, you are setting yourself up for serial, a serial kind of humiliation. And I don't think for a country like India, whatever people may say, oh, you can do this deal and you can, even if you have to make concessions, etc. I think overall, credibility of India, the kind of reputation we have had for several years as a country which is ready to stand even alone when its vital interests are involved, I think resilient from that long term would not be in India's interests.
Okay, let me put one more question to you. As of now, India is, of course, committed to buying Russian oil. The government has made it clear that we're not going to change that. That means Russia benefits because it gets money, but India pays the cost, both in terms of exports to America and presumably in terms of the wider relationship with Washington. What do you say to people who turn around and argue, we, India, have got the bad end of this arrangement?
So, again, I come back to the point I made. This is not about India buying Russian oil. If that was a major concern for Trump, then, the largest purchaser of oil from Russia is China. And not only China, there is a NATO member, Turkey, which is also buying oil from Russia. Recently, by the way, even the Japanese started buying some oil from Russia. Even the European Union, as I think our external affairs minister has repeatedly pointed out, is still buying some oil from Russia. Countries like, for example, Hungary, countries like, the former Central European countries are locked into some kind of a energy relationship with Russia, which they are not able to get away from in a short run. A lot of gas supplies still come from Russia into Europe. So if this was the reason why he has hit out at India, it makes no sense that he does it exclusively against India and not the others whose role in what he's talking about, fanning the flames of war in Ukraine, that is more important than what India is doing. And by the way, India has said not that we will continue to buy Russian oil, but has said we will continue to buy oil from wherever we get the best deal. How can anybody, argue with that?
Let me then end by asking you to look at the big picture. Our relations with America are at their lowest ebb for 3 decades. We have hardly a relationship with Pakistan. Even though the relationship with China is improving, we have serious problems that remain untackled and maybe untackleable. And whilst we have great relations with Russia, we're paying a heavy price for them. Meanwhile, and this is the paradox, America's relationship with China, with Pakistan, and with Russia is better than it was under President Biden. There's been a significant improvement in all three in the last 9 months. Is this therefore a bad time for Indian diplomacy?
I would say that this is certainly a more challenging, time for Indian diplomacy. There is no doubt that we are perhaps in a more vulnerable situation than we have been for quite some time. It will require very careful reorientation of our foreign policy. But even with respect to the United States, we should be a little careful in not sort of believing that this is now a past history. That U.S. India relations are now almost destined to become zero. I mentioned to you why I said that. Because my information is that as far as functional cooperation between the two countries are concerned, whether it is at the defense level, Pentagon level, whether it is in terms of our counterterrorism cooperation, the military exercises continued as they were. Some official level contacts have continued as before. So these are somewhat contrary to the judgment that we are making at this point of time. So perhaps we should reserve judgment. It is possible that this man is very mercurial. Will he tomorrow decide, no, Mr. Modi is a great friend and India is a great country and we have a great deal in common? Who knows? So we should not lock ourselves into a kind of a position which is premised on the India-US partnership now being past history. I don't think we are at that point. So you will need some kind of a caution in going forward, that you will have to make adjustments in your relationship with other countries is certainly something that we should be looking at. That is why I mentioned the Prime Minister's visit to Japan as a pointer in terms of how we are responding to this situation. The fact that we have started intensifying our negotiations with the European Union for a free trade agreement, that's a good pointer. And the Europeans are also today perhaps more interested in raising the level of India-EU relationship than they were before, precisely because of geopolitical changes. So let's take advantage of that, because there are several other important countries which are as worried as we are about the shifts which are taking place in US policy. It's not only with respect to India. So if there are other countries who are also concerned, major countries who are concerned, why should we not strengthen our relationship with those countries? I mean, that's almost a given, isn't it? Look at Brazil, has been also slapped with 50% tariff. They are reaching out to India. So there are ways in which you can try and minimize the impact of this new trend that we see, perhaps taking us to a very different kind of a geopolitical environment.
So in a nutshell, it's a worrying and challenging time, but it's not that we don't have things that we can't do. There are things we can do and we need to do them.
Yeah, so, I think we underestimate our resilience. And I think we have more cards in our hands than perhaps many people believe we have. We are, a country which has, in fact, tried to keep a more independent position, even at a time when we were much weaker than we are today. So I would argue that we are today a relatively more powerful country. We are still growing at the rate of, maybe 6.5% or 7%, the only large emerging economy which is growing at such a fast rate. We may not like the nature of the political dispensation we have. Many people have deep concerns about that. But internationally, the fact that here is a stable polity compared to the kind of turbulence which you see in many other countries, that becomes somewhat of an asset. So I think we should also be mindful of those favorable elements which are there in the current situation. India can actually deal with this pretty successfully.
Okay, let me end with a pun or a wry bit of humor. We have cards in our hands, but we unfortunately don't have a trump.
Well said.
Shyam Saran, thank you very much indeed for the time you've given me, and thank you for sharing your analysis and understanding of the situation India faces. Take care.
Thank you, Karan. A great pleasure talking to you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
A naked man has little to no influence on society. In clothes like this, you step out and you know that you're going to turn heads. You know that you're going to create an impression of a person who cares deeply about the way they look and has a finer eye for detail. And, you know, that seems to be the Bombay Shirt Company way. What I really love about these clothes, and I really mean this, is this looks like a man has walked into the room. I like that. You know, it's nice.